Hey folks, so it's me, John Santo, coming at you live from Los Angeles. I just got back from seeing Neighbors a couple hours ago. Very funny film, very entertaining, well worth the time spent. Very good comedy. I'm here with Shu. Shu, how are you, sir?
Doing all right, man.
Good. So I texted you afterwards that I'd seen it, and there's this weird. So during the movie, I got this weird sensation going on, which was it is it's very much it's about a college fraternity versus a family, a husband, wife, and their newborn child in a battle over property or being quiet. Basically, is the whole thing. Is the fraternity moves in next door.
It's a rowdy neighbors movie.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a rowdy neighbors movie, but it's also a rowdy college film, right? And it's very much. It's tough not to look at it and think about films like Old School or Animal House specifically for me when I was watching it.
Like it wants to be Animal House. Yeah, it wants to be Animal House in the suburbs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the thing that really kind of struck me was in this version, the protagonists would have been the antagonists in Animal House because
Right.
whereas Animal House, sorry.
No, go ahead. That is interesting.
Yeah, so whereas Animal House was definitely, it was, and actually it was Caddyshack, it was the snobs versus the slobs, but very much in that same thing of the younger generation, counterculture, let us party and live and be alive and let the old fogies just kind of, forget you guys and your rules. This film is much more about the older people wanting to have order and peace, being interrupted by young rebellious youth, and in the end, basically winning. I mean, this is about it's spoiler alert. The family, the Seth Rogen character, the protagonists, defeat the fraternity at their own game, and it struck me as an incredibly conservative approach, and not conservative filmmaking, but a politically conservative approach as far as what happened for of a storyline. And this is something that I've noticed a lot with the Apatow films and the Apatow crew, those the branches of Apatow that have sprung out over the years, since he kind of has fostered in this new level of the new generation of comedies. But it's like if you're looking at the 40-Year-Old Virgin, which I think you mentioned was it's saving yourself for the proper person in the proper relationship,
And that is okay.
yes, and that is perfectly okay, which it is. There's no, and again, nothing I'm complaining about is anything wrong with their point of view. There's nothing wrong with a point of view. I just find it really fascinating that they tend to be much more conservative points of view, nor do they ever kind of explore the other side, if that makes any sense. So
It sounds to me like they're doing two things here in general. There's a sort of dealing with middle-age component and growing up and being responsible, but still wanting to have some sort of, you still kind of want to be young, you want to have fun, you want to do those sorts of things, you want to keep things a little spicy, but you've almost gotten to a point where maybe that's just out of your system or past it or just doesn't feel right. So you're not worried so much about, it's cloaked differently, where it doesn't have, whereas you would, if you heard something that was quote-unquote conservative about its movie approach, that focused perhaps on some sort of just growth or nuclear family component, in essence, you'd then anticipate that as a result of that there'd be a much deeper morality related toward, prudish sexual habits, a sort of, there'd be a lot of that socially conservative aspect that runs its way through that. And I think maybe that's where things get thrown off a little bit, because it doesn't seem, while it seems like a generally conservative message, it's not a socially conservative message. So there can be plenty of raunch humor in these films.
Right.
There can be a lot of American Pie-esque fart jokes and poop jokes and, bodily fluid sorts of raunch stuff that you might not expect in something Reagan-esque.
Right.
Yet once you get past that, and once you're willing to laugh at that aspect of it, and maybe grow up a little bit to where you're not bothered by that sort of thing, then the underlying message is some sort of nuclear family component or just growing into middle age and the responsibilities that come with it aren't necessarily a bad thing.
Right. Yeah. And one of the things that they do and let me just kind of actually whip through a few of these titles. So we already did 40-Year-Old Virgin. Knocked Up is a film about pregnancy and a really almost pro-life, because the concept of abortion I don't think ever is even given notice or given rise in it whatsoever, unlike, say, Juno, where it actually is discussed somewhat, and she makes the decision for herself. Knocked Up, I think, if I remember correctly, is just straight up, I'm pregnant, I'm having the kid, you know.
Here we go.
What are we going to do about it? And of course, he does the responsible thing, which is go through the process of growing up to become a proper father, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't want to... here's a weird one now. I know this is a bit of a stretch, but This Is the End pushes a pro-God agenda with the fact that, of course, it's the end of the world and there are demons floating around and the devil is real and heaven is real and everything else like that, and doesn't, and atheism is put down, which I find, and then of course this film, which is about that youth shouldn't to some extent be allowed to be youthful, because they try to balance it out, because Dave Franco even though he's the vice president, quote, just as much the antagonist as Zac Efron is. By the way, who is fantastic in this film. I've never been pro or anti Efron in any way, shape, or form, but Efron really proves that he's got chops and can actually be a legitimate actor, not just comedy, but like there's some genuinely scary moments with him. I mean, I wouldn't say, it's almost like Max Cady from Cape Fear kind of obsession that he gets over trying to be the best frat leader that he can be, and so anyways, but yeah, so Franco is the more studious frat boy. So of course, when everything goes awry, he's able to say, I've been studying, and now I'm going to go off and become a great architect. Whereas Efron, who of course has just all been about the party life, at the end of the show and at the end of the movie ends up being working outside of a men's store with topless, trying to prove.
So he's making $8 an hour, whereas the other guy has a functional living.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Advantage of the education provided for him.
Yes.
Even though there was a partying component in what he did. He still recognized the ability to separate the two, and by virtue of doing that, had an opportunity to be more successful, whereas Efron was all about one thing, screwing around, screwed up his 4 years, and is making $8 an hour.
Mm-hmm. Which
until California changes its minimum wage requirements.
Exactly, yeah, which is also kind of odd, because if I remember correctly, I thought you actually had to keep a GPA up to remain inside a fraternity. I always thought that was one of the rules. They don't pay attention to that.
It's the California. Is it set in California?
I don't think they ever say exactly where it's supposed to take place, but it is shot in L.A.
System,
yeah.
The CU system, the CS system, the system, the CS. You're good. You can work around the 2.0.
Yeah, exactly.
Everyone knows that.
Yeah, it's bizarre. It's really odd. And then the other thing that cropped up during it was, so I read a tweet by Drew McWeeny, who had said that, I forget, he didn't mention what movie he was watching, but he was talking about how even the lightest of homophobic jokes in the 80s wouldn't fly today in movies, right?
Right.
But there's a scene in this where where Efron and Rogan are fighting with rubber dildos and literally trying to shove one in the other one's mouth, which, okay, may not be making a homophobic joke, yet at the same time, isn't that playing off of trying to get a laugh off of homophobia? I mean, the idea of sucking another guy's dick, right? If that's the joke.
That's a classic sort of jock comment.
Yeah, I mean, no one would.
That wouldn't be. I don't know if that would necessarily be as threatening a thing, or the joke probably wouldn't work as well if it wasn't clear that the two guys involved in that joke were heterosexual.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's like, and I don't think that, and the joke wouldn't work the same, though it would be bizarre. You might laugh at it out of a weird, bizarre thing if you were trying to shove fake breasts in a man's face or something like that. But then of course, but then the response to something like that is always, would be more of an oh yeah kind of thing, right? Versus the no, get it away kind of struggle that they go through.
Right.
Yeah, so it's interesting that that these comedies are kind of, and maybe it is purposely done so as you can get appeal to both platforms in a way, right? To both parties. So there's this thing that you can laugh at it because it's completely raunchy and disgusting and fart jokes and and breast milk jokes aside and everything else like that. Yet by its entire plot about conserving the nuclear family, you're able to maintain both sides of the party line within one of these raunchy comedies and not take any flack from either side.
Yeah, maybe so. And I wonder, based on the way that it's lit, because it's got raunch components in there. I think there's, and I don't mean to suggest this either. Like this is where sometimes politics gets really bizarre, and the way politics is interpreted in cinema gets really odd too. There's, as many folks know, there's this conservative belief that Hollywood isn't just liberal, but now shoves its quote-unquote liberal agenda down everybody's throat. Okay?
Right.
You can certainly come up with... Roland Emmerich is a great directorial example of the liberal agenda. Okay?
Sure.
You can very easily go back and look at numerous Roland Emmerich directed films and pull out a hard-line, far-left liberal take on what he is trying to bring across. They're very easy to do like that. I think it's not as easy to do with a lot of other directors, but Emmerich is a very easy example in this regard. This one seems to me a little bit more difficult, but where I'm ultimately going here is that if you throw out a term conservative, if you throw out a term liberal, the conservative term sounds like, well, it's a bunch of Republicans making raunch comedy movies. Perhaps it is, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the case, one. Or two, that it's only Republicans who have an exclusive contract with whatever the nuclear family ultimately is.
Right.
I think there are plenty of liberals and Democrats who have the same relative belief structure. It's good to be married. It's you recognize there are different varieties in whatever your family structure is. It's important to have two parents to better raise kids. Those sorts of things, I think, are across party platforms. So maybe this is just the Apatow gang putting together films that are more family-centric in some odd way, as opposed to being necessarily political.
Right. Oh no. I would agree. I don't think they're trying to push any agenda or anything like that. I just find it fascinating that the comedies of, say, the 70s through mid 90s, maybe even into the end of the aughts, actually, had much more of a if they were apolitical. Then if they weren't apolitical, then at least they were much more like counterculture based. I mean, if you look at, again, Caddyshack and
well, what they were class warfare based.
Yes, yeah.
Because all of those, Caddyshack is certainly about snooty golfers.
Sure.
The Adam Sandler golf film is about snooty golfers.
Sure.
Sticking it to snooty golfers. Animal House is about sticking it to the snooty system.
Right.
That is a common theme. So I think that's where the interesting turn in this one ultimately is, and I think you nailed this at the top, is that if someone pitched this movie and said, frat house next door, middle-aged family in the middle, who's the good guy, who's the antagonist, who's the protagonist? Most people would probably say, based on that information, well, the frat house is the protagonist.
Sure. I mean, and that was even the case with Old School. What
I think is probably important to note here is that the nuclear family, the middle-aged family here, isn't particularly wealthy. They're just trying to make it. So there isn't really class warfare here. There's more age warfare here, and then it becomes a dealing with the importance of growing up and the responsibilities of growing up versus the ability to still have some sort of youth and value in that. and which one ultimately is going to win out at the end, and how you approach both of those. So
Sure.
I think there are it's an interesting tweak in the idea, yet it's not entirely out there. It would be really odd and maybe blatantly stereotypically GOP if the nuclear family in the middle was actually ridiculously wealthy, and then they were the good guys.
Right.
That would be an unusual twist. This is just a this is a middle-aged, middle-class family trying to make it work.
Right. And
because of that, you've got noisy neighbors who are being a pain in the ass, and hilarity perhaps occasionally ensues.
And I think also the way they jerry-rig it to some extent is, you keep referring to them as middle-aged when they're not. I mean, these people
that's fair enough, yeah.
Seth Rogen is 32,
Right,
I mean, it's like that's one of those things where it's like these are still, and they're considered old by their 24-year-old,
Right, sure.
Old people. You're like, dude, they got 8 years on you. That's, that's nothing. I mean, that's insane. Especially in today where like they are continually pushing the 60 is the new 50, 40 is the new 20 kind of
right.
angle.
Right. I'm so old. I just live in the 50s or 60s myself, and figure that if you're 32, you're middle aged.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm just out of touch in my own chronological demographic here. So do these movies bother you with the message that they're trying to bring across, or do you just find them fascinating that it seems to be there seems to be a different underlying message than perhaps a lot of the other comedies that may be out there?
Oh no, it doesn't bother me at all, because at the end of the day, if it's a comedy and it works, that's all it needs to do. A comedy at the end of the day, I guess, is not a political tool. A satire is. I mean, Dr. Strangelove, which is very much a comedy, has very strong political points of view and kind of delivers that. Things like the Apatow crew and stuff like that, are using values to form the comedy. But I don't believe that they're trying to they're never trying to push an agenda of any way, shape, or form. And I'm not offended by it. I just find it such an interesting shift. That within a very short period of time, I mean, because 40-Year-Old Virgin was 2002, something like that. I mean, it wasn't 10 years ago approximately, and so that all of a sudden from that shift, which and his breakout, Apatow's breakout, because of course he had a couple failed TV shows which are highly regarded now. They only lasted a season. Freaks and Geeks and Undeclared, and they're incredible shows. They're great shows. And he's had his, and he even did, and Apatow even did, was it Heavyweights? He did one or two of like those weird like kid comedy kind of things during that era. But when 40-Year-Old Virgin broke out, it really kind of changed the comedy landscape in an interesting way. I mean, you'll always have Woody Allen, who will waver back and forth between his things. Sometimes they're funny, sometimes they're not, but they're very much an auteur Woody Allen shtick. But Apatow brought forward a level of comedy. And considering he actually worked with Adam Sandler, or they were roommates. I don't know if they ever actually officially worked together, but they kind of grew up in the same comedy school, same time, and around the same age. I know, Apatow also wrote Ben Stiller, Jim Carrey, the Cable Guy.
Oh.
Yeah. So which was heavily a satire. A very strong satire about the media. And I just find it very interesting that his form of comedy has taken such a grasp, and his kind of, to some extent, you could almost consider him the godfather of comedy right now, because so many people have come from...
So many veins have
sprouted. Exactly. Yeah. They've completely sprung up through him. David Wayne and that his group have also there's kind of been some little intermingling back and forth. But also from the were they Upright Citizens Brigade? Was that who David Wayne came from? I don't want to say that. Don't quote me on that one. But anyways, the comedy group that he came from, along with Amy Poehler but Thomas Lennon, who came from that same group, is one of the screenwriters of. Anyways, he was on so that entire Reno 911 group. Right, they were all from the same thing. Anyways, Thomas Lennon, who was in Reno 911, he and his writing partner, who was also in Reno 911, whose name I can't think of, went on to write the Night at the Museum movies and The Love Bug and like other kind of more broader. Oh, the pacifier, right? So much more kind of what we would still look at now as kind of the typical comedy, I guess. What the comedies that we knew of that were the non-Apatow films. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So, but yeah, so Apatow's kind of, the webbing that Apatow has shot from him with the talent and everything else like that has really kind of formed a very specific comedy that deals much more strongly in these family values. And there are definitely the Step Brothers, and even though that's much more in the shooting off in the Will Ferrell vein, but I'm trying to think of what was the one with Paul Rudd. Oh my God! It was, and they played Big Brother. They played the Big Brothers to the adopted kids, or to the foster. They played Big Brothers to kids, whose name I can't think of right now. Anyways, yeah. So there's all of those films, though, very much kind of deal with much more of a.
Is that the movie where they loved Rush?
Yes, that was the movie where they loved Rush. Yes.
That was the best part of that movie.
Yeah.
I can't remember the title of it either. That was the best part of the movie.
Wait a minute. No. That may have been another one, actually.
Okay.
Rush
is making a comeback from that group of people. I think is probably as often as anything the funniest part of many of those films.
Yeah, just let me look up here. Go ahead.
Because I was going to ask you overall. Now that you've seen Neighbors and you've referenced some of the other Apatows, I'm not necessarily and I guess in comedy in general, so much of it is hit and miss anyway.
Sorry, right. I Love You, Man was the one with Rush.
Okay.
And that again was about the heterosexual friendship and kind of that male bonding thing. And then Role Models was the other one.
That's right.
So those were the two that I think also fall within that same Apatow vein. Anyways,
so in the Apatow vein, how does Neighbors stack up?
Oh man, that's a good question. It's it is in that same. Now I liked Role Models a lot. I liked I think probably like most of these, they're funny at the time. Give that they will latch on to certain groups. I think This Is the End probably will become a more popular film over time than this one will. This will have its run. Will probably gain a little bit of steam after a while, but I don't know. It's like, how big is Knocked Up now? How many people pay attention and watch that?
I don't even think of it.
Yeah, and so. And I think there are probably
I'm not necessarily the overall demographic here either, but
sure.
I don't even give that film a thought.
Sure, yeah.
But I know about the 40-Year-Old Virgin largely because of its breakthrough component and its referenced as often as it is. I'm not even sure it's a particularly great film in and of itself. It's very watchable. It's got some funny moments. I think there's a lot of inconsistency there, and I feel like that whole group has issues of inconsistency through most of its films.
Yeah. Oh, completely.
So, you might land a little bit more. I don't know if forgiving's the right word, but you might have a little different take and a willingness to grasp on to a lot of other folks too. Because hey, there are a lot of fans. There are a lot of fans of these people out there from a comedy standpoint.
Sure.
So is Neighbors something that I'm gonna laugh at? Throughout course of it, or
what, you will laugh at it. And here's something that I think actually, because looking over Role Models and I Love You, Man, and these are movies that have kind of, I don't want to say they've disappeared, but this is definitely, people don't, even trying to think of the title of them. They'll have their little niches, and they, it's kind of it's the comedy du jour, and then whatever the next one is with the same cast comes out, great, I can laugh at that one because they're new jokes, and then move on from there, blah blah blah. But I think that's interesting that the one thing that will give the good ones much more universality that carry on through time is, I think, the fact that maybe they are actually latching on to these more again, I don't want to say conservative views, but these the family unit, these traditions and things that will carry on through time. It will be plenty of days into the future if it comes to the point where men and women never marry anymore and their seed is simply transferred into a tube. That's going to be a while still, probably.
The glory days.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So but so that type of humor will continue to be relatable to future generations. So the odds of them holding up over time, especially I think Neighbors is something that will whoever maybe the teenagers are today, maybe when they or college students today laugh at it from one point of view,
Right.
and then once they get married and have a kid, and it's like they're dealing with the kid up at night because some neighbor's screaming or something like that. They will now be able to flip it and look at it from a different point of view, right? So it's it's a very interesting angle. I mean, it's a really interesting kind of comedy movement that we're going through, and I don't want to put Will Ferrell and his brand of comedy in that realm, even though again they're all still kind of part of the same family at times. They're all very incestuous. They're always borrowing people and actors and writers, etc., back and forth. But it won't be an Anchorman. It won't be a. I mean, God, I feel like even old school has slipped and fallen, through the cracks over a decent period of time. Right. But again, our age may be the problem with us to properly determine that.
I think it's a real possibility, and this is a much deeper conversation for another time. It's very, I guess it's very interesting to watch any movie in any period of time and try to extrapolate, understanding how people were at that time and why that was interesting and how they were watching it. But comedy much more so. It's so difficult for comedy to transition and translate from generation to generation to generation, and ultimately be as funny as it was. So the comedy era that we tend to grow up in is the one that naturally you're going to gravitate to, and then there will be bits and pieces of comedy that comes through that you find funny, but maybe it's just not quite the same.
Sure.
And you don't feel like it's as consistent. I think there are. And I don't think I'm that old, but for whatever reason, I love the Woody Allen comedies from the late 60s and early 70s.
Oh, completely, yeah.
I think there was a great batch of those films, but I'm not sure, honestly, if a 20-year-old was to watch this or a fan of Neighbors was to watch this from a Woody Allen comedy, whether they'd see the same sort of humor. Sure. I still consider, for instance, Bananas, which is a remarkably inconsistent film.
Yes.
To have maybe the funniest first 10 minutes and the funniest last 10 minutes I've ever seen in film.
Yep.
But there's an hour portion in the middle of that movie that's almost unwatchable. But I don't know, again, that I've ever seen anything on film as funny as the beginning and the end of Bananas.
Right, and what's interesting is I think also, though, with the beginning of Bananas, it's completely relatable today because of its corporate environment.
Perhaps. I'm not sure it's relatable to Howard Cosell.
No, this is true. There are things about it that people won't get.
They're like anything. There are very cultural, in-the-moment things that don't have the same sort of humor value unless you understand and have a specific recollection of that point in history, and that's totally understandable. There are probably a lot of 30s and 40s and 50s comedies out there that are exactly relatable to a specific time that I don't get the joke as well as somebody else ultimately would, or a movie that comes out right now that might reference Katy Perry that I don't get.
Right.
So there's plenty of that aspect depending on your time frame and the rest of it that goes on, but comedy is a very interesting thing to watch from generation to generation to generation and see what it is you'd ultimately like. And I would be fascinated if a 20-something-year-old or a 30-something who might gravitate toward a movie like The 40-Year-Old Virgin, who might gravitate toward a movie like Neighbors,
right.
Who might gravitate toward a Seth MacFarlane movie.
Right.
Would think that the Groucho Marx movies, the Charlie Chaplin films, the Woody Allen films, the Mel Brooks films.
See, now that's it. You actually just brought up something very interesting, actually, because I want to refer to that.
Sort of comedic entertainment component that this group of movies ultimately does, because across all of these veins, they're all done by comic troupes. Whether they had a vaudevillian connection, whether they were inspired by a vaudevillian connection, whether there was
whether they wrote for
outbreak, whether they wrote for television, whether there was a 70s outbreak, whether they were in a position where Johnny Carson made their career, whether they were Adam Sandler, Jim Carrey, or whether they were McFarlane and Apatow.
Right.
There's all you're all gonna. These guys want to be comedians. They find a venue in a variety of different ways. Movies is part of that. And they succeed and fail, and I think often do so within the construct of the very same film that's in front of them.
Sure. Yeah, now it's interesting. So you brought up Brooks. Blazing Saddles is celebrating its 40th anniversary this year, and they've been kind of bringing it up on radio shows. It may have literally just happened. It may have just been released around this time 40 years ago because Brooks has been making the rounds, and there have been some other things like that. And Blazing Saddles is a movie that even younger generations know today. And I mean, I work with a bunch of kids who've seen Blazing Saddles and laugh at it, etc. I'm wondering again, going back to my angle of the humanity of it, the being able to relate to very human aspects of it. One of the things that makes Blazing Saddles work? It's the raunchy comedy with the social message of racism involved in it,
right,
which is just as alive today, unfortunately, as it was then. You know, whatever equality it is that African Americans have gained since then, I'm sure it's progressed, but at the same time, it's not as if we don't have a large number of people out there wanting to go fuck off, nigger. So it's a really interesting kind of point in showing that. The universal themes of the film and how they relate to kind of people and the way people look at the world. If there was no racism today, in a weird, perfect world, if there was no racism today, I'd be fascinated to see if Blazing Saddles would kind of be more in like a bringing up baby time capsule camp of comedy versus something that still feels relevant and alive and energetic today.
Maybe so. Why do you think Airplane is universal?
I think, okay, and that's interesting.
Because I do think Airplane is universal. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
No, I would agree. I think Airplane actually still holds up universally because even if you don't know what it's referencing, even if you don't understand Airport and any of those movies, it is much more of a movie about one-liners and delivering jokes as quickly as possible. To some extent, it's much more... it's a visual comedy, but it's still kind of that same thing as say the Marx Brothers or Chaplin or Keaton would have done, where it's much more of a visual comedy. You know, it's the one-liners and everything are, when the shit hits the fan, cut to shit hitting a fan.
Right, right.
It's like that'll throw somebody off their chair in an instant, because it's like that literal translation of stuff. Or Robert Stack with the sunglasses and pulling off one pair and having another pair underneath. There are those things that they do with it that's just so. So it's very a surreal comedy in a way, right? And that is something that isn't based in a time or in a politic or in cultural shifts. Those are things that continually continually carry on. I think, which is why Buster Keaton films and Chaplin films, where it's all about these visual gags, hold up. And they're still being looked at today, if not by college students or high school students. They're still highly regarded and still shown quite often. I mean, you don't.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, because I think they are highly regarded, but I don't think they're appreciated by a casual comic fan.
Yeah,
a casual comic fan, I don't think gets the same. There may be a respect component there, but that's it. They don't really think it's all that. If you ask them, you think that's funny? It's like, it's okay, I guess.
Right.
Whereas I think Airplane has some sort of transcendent value. And I don't know if, and I don't know what the reason is for that. Maybe there are just so many generations in time, or there was a big split. Everything after the 1970s still has some sort of connectivity. Everything before the 1970s looks old.
Right.
I don't know. I think I would think to a large degree, a lot of 20-year-olds today, kids who were born in the early to mid 90s, would think that the 70s are archaic and the 80s put out movies that are slow and kind of stupid.
Sure.
So it would seem to me that would feel old to them ultimately as well. Yet every once in a while, I guess there's still maybe a nugget that can continue to be funny for a longer period of time. I don't know if Apatow has that sort of lasting power. I don't know if we'll look back 20 years from now and say The 40-Year-Old Virgin is a movie that stood up.
Right.
I don't know if we'll think that the Seth MacFarlane comedy is something that stood up. I don't know if we'll think that from a television standpoint that the early Simpsons, the Conan O'Brien era of The Simpsons, is something that will ultimately hold up. For me, absolutely. But maybe for younger folks, it's just not quite the same. And, comedy is something that is very specific, perhaps more so to your ultimate demographic than even a lot of other mediums ultimately are. I don't know.
That's interesting. Yeah, I would say it's now part of that argument. I would go with it's the black and white thing is always weird, because when there are so many people who won't watch a black and white movie even as adults, right? Which to me is always kind of a real mind-boggling thing. But not saying that I have never had that phobia either in my past. I mean, that's something that I remember thinking. That's why would I think God. I even remember not being forced to watch Citizen Kane, but it was sitting there and they're like, oh, you should watch it. It's a great film. Blah 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 blah. And my mind is, it's fucking black and white. Do I really want to watch black and white? And so there's that. Jumping over that hurdle is its own weird thing.
Right.
Maybe with stuff like I feel like stuff like Airplane. Maybe it's the lizard brain. Maybe it's that thing in us that just no matter what, it's watching somebody get conked over the head with a bat is something that goes way back to our caveman days, and for some reason we find it funny now. There could be something very kind of instinctual and just kind of base in a lot of the airplane humor. And again, like with Blazing Saddles, it's like everybody talks about the farting around the campfire scene. Right. Everybody remembers the raunchy comedy stuff. Everybody remembers fucking a pie. Those things that are just like so absurd and gross that appeals to that portion of us that we can laugh at something because it's not us doing something that ridiculously stupid. Yet at the same time, we kind of this is true. This is true. But yours was boysenberry, if I remember the correct pie.
Right, that is correct. Tucson on a Saturday night.
Mm-hmm. That's just Tucson. Everybody's doing that.
Right.
That's why we all got into the Pie Hut. I mean, after midnight.
Exactly. Yeah.
Pie Hut after dark.
I don't know that I necessarily. Yeah, Elvira shows up every now and then. Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily think that's comedic, because just real life. Yeah. But I think it's an interesting point. Who knows? Maybe even down the road on a future FGP or something like that, the Graps can chime in, and if El Tremendo can find a mask, perhaps he can be funny too.
Yeah, I think we'll have to. I think comedy is something that we'll definitely have to explore, because I know that there's been a movement called Mumblecore that came out several years ago that was all about this very no-budget filmmaking, dealing with kind of 20-somethings and these very kind of simple plot points and nervousness and neurosis and just trying to get a date is weird. And they are, and it has evolved. Mumblecore is now officially kind of passed, but those directors have evolved into becoming more notable filmmakers today to some extent in the indie scene. And Dub watched two films by two of the people who kind of came out of this, who've kind of evolved from this group, and they were listed as comedies on Netflix. And of course, he tweets right after, he's like, "Why the fuck is Netflix labeling this as a comedy?" And it's interesting because I can see how they're comedies of human behavior versus being, I'm going to tell you a joke, I'm telling you the joke, I've told you the joke, now fucking laugh. That abrupt, in-your-face joke that makes you go ha ha. They are much more about one of them called Hump Day, which is about two guys who agree to basically, while drunk and high at some party, say, yeah, we'll make a gay porn film for this festival, and then of course are then having to commit to do it, and the awkwardness behind that situation is where the comedy comes from. Though jokes are never delivered, it's much more about feeling and emotion and kind of human behavior. Then Drinking Buddies is another one, that's just recently come out by Joe Swanberg, and and they're much more just human life, and the laughs, may never be giant outbursts, ha ha kind of stuff, but you find the amusement, you find the comedy, which is has a very wide definition. Comedy, it's what's funny to one person is not funny to another person. Horror is the same way. Those are the two genres that really kind of are very elastic. But yeah, so I find it very interesting that these things that are labeled comedies, just to somebody like to Aaron or Dub, can't and I not, it's neither good nor bad, but he can't appreciate that which they're giving him. So yeah, I think we need to. I think comedy is kind of something. That's a huge fucking topic that we'll have to explore at some point in time. Anyways. Yeah, so that's just really all I got, sir. Any final things on you?
No, that's it. No? So you'd say Neighbors is worth checking out. It's
totally. Yeah,
you're good to go. It's
yep.
It to a large degree does what it's supposed to do, and maybe it's going to make some money in the process.
Yeah, well, it unseated Spider-Man as the #1 movie.
Wow, I saw Spider-Man with Tremendo over the weekend.
Oh, yeah, go ahead real quick.
Crap.
Yeah.
Wow. You would tip me off as to how disastrous that is. And I found one of the things I find fascinating about both of the Spider-Men in this most recent incarnation.
We consider this is the amazing incarnation versus Sam Raimi's just Spider-Man incarnation.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Is that there's so much angst that they try to deal with, and occasionally it crosses into being pretty well done, and then it completely loses that aspect of it, gets derailed, and then you're watching some of this and you wonder what in the crap is going on.
Yeah.
It just completely there's so and in the second one in the second one it's much worse. The blips, the thing, it's almost like the whale can hold its breath for a longer period of time and only comes up for air every 45 minutes.
Right.
So when it comes up for air, it kind of breaks through the surface, and then in that brief moment, it's pretty good. Because it's not that Garfield's bad, and it's not that Emma Stone's bad, and all of that sort of stuff. And I'm glad in terms of one of the 17 bad guys who are in this movie. If you ever want to remake a Jim Carroll film, you've got the perfect actor to do it. But
are you speaking of Dane DeHaan?
I believe so.
That's actually that's really an interesting choice. If they ever want to do a Jim Carroll biopic of some sort or something, other Beyond Basketball Diaries.
Basketball Diaries again.
Yeah.
You know who to go to.
That's really, yeah. Because to some extent, because DiCaprio was too good looking to some extent for that role.
Mm-hmm.
And DiCaprio and DeHaan definitely share some kind of facial similarities to some extent.
Yes.
But DeHaan is a great choice for that kind of thing.
Well, we need another Jim Carroll movie.
Yeah, of course.
Jim Carroll and Hunter S. Thompson go, and Kerouac have their own world tour. Bang, there's your movie. Those guys throw them in it, you're good.
I would watch that, yeah.
There you are. You can make the whole thing. Who knows what you're going to come up with? Probably a lot of heroin in the process. And it'll be better than this incarnation of Spider-Man, which it was almost to me as if, talking about eras and talking about comedy, I felt like this was a movie that should have been made. It was much more comfortable in the 80s than it was now.
Yeah.
In addition to having too much stuff and holy crap being longer than 2 hours, which is staggering. This is one of those films that there was so much meat that there was so much fat you could have gotten rid of. This thing could have checked in at 140 and at least a little bit cleaner and a little bit more.
It literally felt like it was just a bunch of half-hour things cutting back and forth between each other.
It sort of almost did. There were so many different odd plots that never really ultimately connect. And I guess a lot of second films try to do this because they're really transitional franchise films that are ultimately building for something bigger coming up. Yeah. But this one just so regularly missed the mark, and it missed the mark bad. And it looked like, since we were chatting about comedies, like it had all this setup going on, and then delivery was ultimately flat. Yeah. And then you're wondering, what the hell did I just watch for the last 10 minutes? This thing is completely missed. And yeah, it was staggering. But watched it with Tremendo, who's a big comic guy, and said, you know what? If they were going for that era of Spider-Man that was set in the 80s, that was absolutely unreadable, then this movie captured that perfectly.
Right.
So maybe there's something in that homage. Maybe it was supposed to be the crap fest that it ultimately was.
Now this is interesting because being the biggest comic book geek of all of us, what were Tremendo's thoughts afterwards? Do you remember?
Tremendo's thoughts were something like this.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, good.
Pretty much. Oh, he hated it.
Yeah.
He absolutely. Yeah, he completely despised it.
Yeah, because
and I'd had dang it, I wish I remembered exactly what. He had a main specific element that really irritated him, and unfortunately I can't remember it right now because, again, there were dozens of problems with this film. But yeah, there was one thing specifically that jumped off at him, and I can't remember it at the moment. But it was really bad. Yeah. I don't know if it's the worst comic book. I don't, and this is a weird dynamic too. I don't know if it's the worst major franchise comic book movie debacle out there since this incarnation took place about 10 or 15 years ago.
Right.
Got to be in the conversation. And I say that, you know, with some asterisks because you have some of those secondary, smaller
Sure.
comic book offshoot projects like Catwoman.
Sure.
That were just rancid. And rancid on every level, and, you know, given some thought, we could come up with a bunch of others that fall under that vein.
Sure. Oh, I'm sure, like Elektra and
Sure.
yeah.
But most of your main franchise movies,
The big boys, yeah.
the big boys have something that you can usually grab onto, more often than not.
Sure.
And this one largely came up empty on a pretty consistent basis and was just so all over the board that it was really frustrating to try to grab onto anything that ultimately worked because there was just too much of the web ultimately there. They
Right.
really needed to narrow this down and make it much more focused than it ultimately was.
Yeah, for me it harkens back to the Schumacher Batman movies. It's not Batman and Robin bad per se, but at least with the Schumacher films, they went all out for the camp, you know, and they kind of, I mean, you could defend them by saying they're supposed to be campy, they're supposed to be that ridiculous, because it's like you got motorcyclists painted in neon, and, you know, Batman's got nipples. It's all sorts of weird bullshit that, you know, the purists can sit there and go, that's not Batman. But at the same time, within the weird universe that they constructed, it's at least consistent.
Yeah.
Whereas with Spider-Man, it's just like it doesn't know what the fuck it is 3/4 of the time.
Right.
So yeah. So well, good. I'm glad you got the opportunity to see that.
I also saw Nonstop. I don't know if I mentioned this Tuesday night. Did I mention that I'd seen Nonstop?
No, actually, you hadn't.
Okay, and that Nonstop has a little bit more stopping that I'd ultimately like for it to have.
Oh no, like in midair.
Well, not it just kind of.
That'd be kind of cool.
Yeah, it would. It would. It's all right. You know, it's got Liam Neeson. They do things. The payoff at the end ultimately doesn't deliver.
Right.
It gets curiously. It wants to be curiously political, but it doesn't go far enough in what it seems to be trying to set up. So it does a nice job of working around to get there, but the final realization of who's responsible for what's going on kind of leaves you flat.
Right.
And, you know, beyond that, Liam Neeson acts like Liam Neeson and has his moments where he's a really bad person, but, you know, is allowed to overcome. And, yeah, so I've seen worse.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to, it's interesting, we'll have to create like a Neeson scale.
Yeah.
Oh, no, we did talk about this, right, because I think I would like to create a Neeson scale.
Correct, yeah. So I apologize for redundancy there.
No, that's great. No, I think no, but maybe on Tuesday night we'll have to discuss the Neeson scale if enough people have seen enough of his movies, because it really does feel, especially if he comes out with another one. I mean, we've got Taken 3 coming, but like,
wow.
I want at least one or two more of these, and I can't think of the one that had him and January Jones. I forget what the name of that one was, where his life is taken away from him and he's no longer who he said. You know, his identity is stolen basically. But he has this kind of fascinating series of B action movies. I mean, they're to some extent they're almost the Steven Seagal films and the Jean-Claude Van Damme films of their day, right?
Right.
And we'll have to kind of like create the Neeson scale of, you know, I guess to some extent Taken would be at the top of that, and I don't know if it's because it's the best of these movies or if it was simply the first, so we were all shocked that Neeson could be an action hero.
Yes, and it's kind of weird how he's gone on something of a bell curve.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, if you think back to early in his career, you're thinking Darkman. At least I think Darkman, because I think Darkman is among the most fantastic movies ever made. And it's rare that I will use the term most and fantastic back to back, but when it comes to Darkman, certainly deserving. And then he goes on to a career that makes a lot more serious stuff, and he delivers very well in that regard. And of late, it's almost been paycheck related.
Yeah.
But he's made those movies very entertaining and generally easy to watch. So in the process of it, he's done his job. I'm not sure it's ultimately what he envisioned that his career would be, but he's come through. And I think folks enjoy what he ultimately does, and he has become, in that niche, maybe more than Statham has, a bankable action star in a specific genre of films. Now, when there's a Liam Neeson film, I think there's a chance that that movie's going to make some money.
Right.
He may be, even though the budget for these films isn't much, he may be. I think you could possibly argue he may be as bankable an actor as there is out there right now. At least in that specific genre.
Yeah.
He's not a guy, and I don't believe, and this is something for, points down the road. I don't believe in the bankability of movie stars. I think that is the most overrated fallacy in the industry today, and I've felt this way for a number of years, and can provide example after example after example to back that up.
Sure. I think today especially. The movie star is the bankable movie star is no go. I would disagree with you to some point, because I do believe that there would be misses, but I do think that casting specific stars in films for a decent period of time. So if the 70s was like if the 70s was the director's time, the 80s per se was was like the producer's time. The 90s would have been the actor's time, and now we're moving into something much more bizarre, which is kind of like a franchise time, because because it's like you don't have heavy hitter stars playing superheroes, right? It's like Chris Hemsworth or oh my God, Captain America, whose name I can't think of right now. I'm really sorry, because I actually like you. These guys were not bankable stars for the most part. These guys were not, put them in a movie and we've got a great opening weekend. These are all based on the character they're portraying. And it's the same thing with Star Wars. It's like, it's Ewan McGregor and those guys were not. You're not going to sit there and go, oh yeah, Ewan McGregor, Liam Neeson, and Natalie Portman in a movie. You're going to make fucking billions. It's Star Wars, right?
Right.
Same thing with the Lord of the Rings movies. Had those not hit, same thing with the Harry Potter films. They create stars, they create actors who hopefully will then want to progress their career and maybe make I don't want to say better films, but non-genre based or non-franchise based movies, and hopefully can be successful in that. I thought Chris Hemsworth was quite good in Rush, and I think Rush is actually one of those overlooked films of last year.
That's interesting. That's interesting. Rush largely bored me.
Did it really? Yeah. See, Rush I actually liked because I expected Days of Thunder. I really, because the trailers and everything made me go, okay, I've seen this before in Days of Thunder. But the fact that they were neither antagonist nor protagonist, they were both dicks and good guys.
Right.
I thought that to me was kind of a really interesting touch, and
I felt they really had a hard I thought they really had a hard time continually focusing on whatever that rivalry was supposed to be. So I felt like the actual rivalry was very inconsistent throughout the course of that film, and that was the area that ultimately left me flat.
Right. Now that's fair. I can see that. I can totally see that. And I think Daniel Bruhl, who played the other lead in that film, and maybe it was just him knocking me out with his performance on that one, because I really thought he really handled that one quite well. And it was the most un-Ron Howard movie, if that makes any sense.
Yet, yes, it was. Yet, I don't think it was un-Ron Howard enough, meaning that I think I wanted Le Mans, or I think I wanted Grand Prix.
Right.
I wanted better auto racing footage, and I didn't get that either.
Right, that's fair.
That bothered me as well.
Which is funny, because I don't know if you noticed this, but the opening sequence is literally felt lifted from the opening of Grand Prix, where they would have the close-ups of people tightening gear, tightening bolts and gears and stuff like that. It was a very Grand Prix opening, and you can again see Howard's love of classic Hollywood cinema.
Right, and I think I kind of wanted more of that. And if you go back and watch Le Mans is a really odd film.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have a word of dialogue for 45 minutes.
Was that the James Garner one, or that's the McQueen one? Okay.
Garner is Grand Prix, McQueen is
right. Okay.
But the auto racing footage in Le Mans is phenomenal, and that's what I wanted to see. During the auto racing footage, I wanted to see that caliber of auto racing footage out of Rush, and I didn't get that. And then I also felt like I was taken away from a lack of consistency in the rivalry between these two main folks.
Right.
And between the two racers, and I was kind of bummed about that aspect as well.
Now, odd question, and we've completely gone away from what we were talking about.
So
who cares?
Yeah.
Neighbors, yeah, no, who cares?
So two racers are neighbors. One
Yes.
of them is a lot more focused than the other one. The other one parties a little bit too much. And you'll notice that the one non-partying neighbor won a heck of a lot more Grand Prix than the guy who partied a little bit more, who only won one. So once again, the focused neighbor is the one who ultimately comes out on top. So it's important in a conservative Ron Howard film about racing to be focused as opposed to be the party boy. Because if you're focused, you're going to make a lot of money, and you're going to invent new fancy stuff related to cars, and you're not going to die, unfortunately, of a heart attack or something of that ilk in the mid-40s.
70s.
There you go. So really, Rush and Neighbors is the exact same film.
In an awkward way, there are kind of some strange links between them.
So it completely fits.
Yeah, so way to bring it back. Thank you, sir. You know, we're going to wrap it up right there then, just for the hell of it. Folks, thanks for watching. Again, every Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Pacific, we will be streaming Film Geek Primer Live, so join us then. Schu, thank you very much.
You got it, man.
So, all right, we are